would you describe liminal spaces? Unsettling? Existential? Artificial? These low-quality, empty and atmospheric pictures of architecture or human-made objects in general have gained a great amount of attention over the last few years, and people have expressed their feelings towards them in extensive detail, mainly on the disturbing nature of these pictures and the eerie feeling you get when looking at them. But while these existential and often pessimistic analyses are fascinating in their own right, I only relate to them to a certain degree. Liminal spaces are disturbing, creepy and lonely, no question. But for me and for some other people, they mainly give off a sense of comfort. A sense of comfort so prevalent that I consider looking at these bizarre, abnormal pictures as a relaxing and calming experience. A sense of comfort that is the strongest when you're mentally at your lowest. At those moments where you just want to vanish from this reality and dive into another one. Let's talk about the comfort of liminal spaces and the desire to disappear. What are liminal spaces? A lot of people have tried to come up with a definition for this phenomenon. The most accepted definition of liminal spaces defines them based on the meaning of liminality, which derives from the Latin word limen, which simply means threshold. In this case, a liminal space would simply be a transitional space or state. A place where you aren't supposed to stay for long periods of time, where you're simply supposed to pass through, like a highway, a hallway, or a mall. And to be fair, transitional spaces make up a huge part of liminal space photographs. But then there are liminal spaces like this one. It's the interior of a house with surprising little amounts of furniture. You wouldn't call a home a transitional space. Maybe in the grand scheme of things, but not in the traditional sense. The uncanny feeling you might get from this picture might come from the fact that the room has been ripped out of the context it has been designed for, which would be to be filled with furniture. This same idea can be applied to empty highways, hallways and malls. They aren't designed to be empty. Highways should be filled with passing cars. Hallways are meant for people to walk from one point to another. And when going to a mall, it's usually filled with groups of people. This eerie feeling is also referred to as canopsia, the eerie fallen atmosphere of a place that's usually bustling with people but is now abandoned and quiet. So, liminal spaces are either transitional spaces or spaces that have been ripped out of their designed context, or a combination of both? Maybe, but it doesn't explain pictures like this one. A perfectly normal basement with normal looking furniture and kids' toys. I think we can all agree that despite the fact that this isn't a transitional space or a place that has been removed from its design context, that it's still a liminal space. You might argue that a kid's playroom is designed to have kids playing in it, so in that way it has been ripped out of its designed context. Alright, fair. But how about this picture? You've seen pictures like these a million times. It's one of those typical pictures that you might find in a catalog from a furniture company. Even though the photograph doesn't feature kids playing in the room, nobody would consider this a liminal space photograph. I think you get the idea that coming up with a definition for liminal spaces isn't the easiest thing in the world. So maybe we need to take a different approach. When you see a liminal space picture, you immediately identify it as such. You don't have to check first if it's a transitional space or if it has been removed from its designed context before noticing that it is a liminal space. No. You know it's a liminal space because of the specific feeling you get when looking at it. I think it has been universally accepted that the feeling you get when looking at liminal spaces is quite unique. Even though the way a liminal space achieves to produce this feeling varies from picture to picture, the produced feeling stays pretty much consistent throughout all pictures. In my opinion, we should define liminal spaces based on the feeling associated with them, rather than based on their physical traits or the way this feeling gets produced, since the feeling generally stays the same across all different types of liminal spaces. Neither should we base our definition solely on the meaning of the term liminal. The only two physical traits that are consistent throughout all liminal spaces are the presence of man-made structures or objects and the absence of people. We can base our definition on those two principles. What do you feel when looking at liminal spaces? Fear? Nostalgia? Discomfort? Of course, this is something that differs from person to person. Some people don't feel anything at all when looking at liminal spaces. But this video and liminal spaces in general aren't for those people. Due to their usually early 2000s setting and aesthetic, a time period during which most users on the internet grew up, liminal spaces emit a strong sense of familiarity, but at the same time a sense of uneasiness. It's like something is wrong, but you just can't exactly pinpoint it. It's kinda like the uncanny valley, but for infrastructure, objects, or even nature that has been manipulated by humans. They emit the feeling of loneliness, despite the fact that those spaces aren't supposed to feel lonely in everyday life. This mix of uneasiness and familiarity applies to basically every liminal space picture. Sometimes the familiarity aspect is stronger than the creepy aspect, or the other way around, but it's always the combination of those two feelings that make liminal spaces feel liminal. Now again, what is a liminal space? After my definition, a liminal space picture is a picture that features human-made or manipulated structures or objects that doesn't contain any people and that emits a strong feeling of familiarity, but at the same time a feeling of uncanniness and discomfort. Not the most elegant definition, but it ticks all the boxes. The earliest mention of the concept of liminal spaces that I could find is from a Tumblr post from 2016, which lists places where, I quote, reality is a bit altered. Some examples are playgrounds at night, rest stops on highways, and abandoned 7-Elevens. This post got followed up by another post where someone explains that most of those listed places are called liminal spaces. Places like rest stops, stairwells, trains, parking lots, waiting rooms, airport feels weird when you're in them because their existence is not about themselves, but the things before and after them. They have no definitive place outside of their relationship to the spaces you are coming from and going to. However, the fact that the concept of liminal spaces was already established at the time of the creation of this post confirms that it must be even older than that. I tried to find any mentions of liminal spaces on Google and YouTube before the year 2016, and I got some results, but those were just loosely or not at all connected to the modern concept of liminal spaces. This here, for example, is an article from 2011 about liminal spaces. However, at that time, liminal spaces were solely defined based on the meaning of liminality, and they didn't have the same attributes that they have today. According to Google Trends, 2016 was the year where the term started gaining traction, maybe even thanks to their Tumblr post. But the term really exploded in popularity in 2020 thanks to a 4chan post that got posted in May of the previous year, featuring a short horror story with an attached image that reads as follows. If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the back rooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum humbus, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has hurt you. I think you should all be familiar with the backrooms. At the time, many people pointed out the dreamlike quality of the picture and started noticing the same properties in other images. The trend started gaining traction on YouTube with videos like images that seem strangely familiar or images that you've seen in your dreams. The first one of these videos that I could find is the video titled Images That Seem Strangely Familiar by YouTuber Alex Wahlberg, which surprisingly only has around 3,000 views. This particular genre of slideshows of creepy images with underlying music isn't something new. In fact, the origins of this trend can be traced back all the way back to 2010. The trend in its current form started gaining popularity in early 2019 with videos like unnerving images with unnerving music, unnerving images with Minecraft cave sounds, or unnerving images with happy music. However, Alex Wahlberg's video is to my knowledge the first one that applies this genre to liminal spaces. Not all of the featured images are liminal spaces, but most of them are. The trend of liminal space slideshows got really popular at the start of quarantine in 2020, with channels like Float being one of the most popular contenders of this genre. Is this how I'm gonna spend my life? Nobody loves me. I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up. The purpose of this video is to show you how liminal spaces can be a source of comfort when being in the right state of mind, or much rather in a bad state of mind. But in order to do that, we first have to understand what makes them unsettling to most people. When I was looking for pictures of normal kids' playrooms, not only came I across those typical furniture catalog pictures, but I also came across pictures like these. On Google, those pictures are listed as your standard furniture catalog pictures, like the ones that I showed earlier, and not as one might think as liminal spaces. And yet, they look like they could pop up on the liminal space subreddit. Both are ripped out of their designed context, an aspect often present in liminal spaces, but only one of them can be considered a liminal space, because as we've established earlier, it makes you feel a certain way. And in most people's cases, this feeling would be discomfort, or maybe even fear, but almost certainly a negative primary feeling. But what makes this picture so much creepier than this one? It all comes down to atmosphere. And the methods to achieve this specific atmosphere are consistent throughout most liminal space pictures. In this particular case, one of the reasons why this picture seems off is because of its lack of people. And I know the first non-liminal space one doesn't have any people in it too. But as we've established with our definition, the absence of people is a fundamental rule of a liminal space. You are used to picturing kids' playrooms with kids playing in them. If you would add playing kids into this picture, it would lose its properties as a liminal space and therefore become a relatively unremarkable photograph of a kid's playroom. The second reason is the fact that most of these look like they were designed in the 90s or early 2000s, a time period in which most internet users grew up in, and thus providing a sense of familiarity. But not only does it provide a sense of familiarity, but also a sense of weirdness. There is something deeply uncanny about the artificiality of those rooms from this specific time period. I think it might come from the overload of colors that these old playrooms feature and the fact that they are usually illuminated by yellow lights, which adds to this 90s, early 2000s aesthetic and to the overall liminal space atmosphere. Lighting in general has a huge impact on a photograph's atmosphere. And of course, the lack of lighting is also a form of lighting. The darkness of course being synonymous with fear, creepiness and negative feelings in general. That's why so many liminal space photographs take place at night or in poorly illuminated rooms. Another aspect that adds to the atmosphere of a liminal space is the low quality and graininess of the photograph. Like the 90s, early 2000s setting, this adds to the nostalgia aspect as well as to the creepy aspect. On one hand, it adds to the realism, it makes the picture look like it really got taken in the 90s or early 2000s, where most commercially available cameras were only capable of creating low quality footage. On the other hand, it makes it look like some sort of mysterious found footage. Maybe found footage from a dream, maybe from another dimension. It gives it a certain creepy look. Of course, this isn't a necessity, but it certainly helps. I think you noticed that most of these aspects are not only present in liminal spaces, but in horror photography in general. When I compare this picture of a creepy dark forest to a liminal space, we can see that both feature atmospheric lighting and a quote-unquote bad picture quality. Despite the fact that the lighting in both pictures is very different, they achieve the same thing but through different means. While the forest picture takes the easy route and tries to create a creepy atmosphere by using darkness, the liminal space one achieves the same effect but by using unnatural and artificial looking lighting. They also feature no people. However, the picture of the forest might as well have a monster hidden behind a tree, and it wouldn't change the atmosphere of the picture. If you would add people or monsters to the liminal space picture, it would totally change its atmosphere and the associated feelings. It would cease to be a liminal space. The main difference in atmosphere is the sense of familiarity that's missing or not present enough in the picture of the forest. This really is the deciding factor of the liminal space atmosphere. That's why most people think liminal spaces are creepy and associate them with discomfort, fear, loneliness, and other negative feelings. Because on the surface, they check all the boxes of a typical creepy picture. But the sense of familiarity is ultimately the aspect that differentiates them from other typical creepy pictures, an aspect that amplifies the creepy qualities of those pictures. However, for me, it is the heart of why I find such comfort within them. A comfort that only gets reinforced by the other aspects that make these pictures creepy. At this point, you might still not understand why I'm finding such comfort in something that is obviously striving to achieve the contrary. Liminal spaces are all about luring us in with something that we're familiar with and adding a dark twist. But it's all a matter of perspective and mental state. In fact, I don't always feel comfort when looking at liminal spaces, only in specific moments, under specific circumstances. But some artists understood and captured the essence of what made liminal spaces so comfortable and made them the focal point of their artworks. If they did this consciously or unconsciously isn't relevant in this case. Only the effect on the viewer is of importance. The pictures you see right here are from visual artist Gabrielle Salonga from London. What do you feel when looking at them? They are obviously very pleasant to look at, and yet they fit under the liminal space umbrella. But unlike most liminal spaces, the comfort aspect of those pictures is the main attraction portrayed here. Despite looking very obscure, those are all simplistic structures that we've seen before, just here they're put in a different context. Pools, chairs, stairs, arches, This here is just a very high springboard. The dreamlike aesthetic of these pictures is produced by the inclusion of clouds, a pleasant color scheme consisting of pink, purple and blue, the nonsensical placement of these pools and structures, and the seemingly never-ending world in which those structures are placed in. In my opinion, infinity is the main reason that makes those pictures liminal. Watching into the distance of these pictures, or trying to find the bottom of those deep pits and finding nothing but infinity, gives those pictures that unsettling liminal feeling. Gerald Pike, a New York-based 3D artist, created a series of pictures that give off a similar vibe. They are called dream pools, and they depict pools that you may see at indoor water parks. Even if those pictures are more realistic than the ones by Gabriel Salonga, they still have this dreamlike quality to them. Of course, the liminal aspect comes on one hand from the fact that it has been ripped out of its design context. A public pool without people is just a pool, and you don't see that too often. Also, those outdated white tiles add to the flair and nostalgia aspect. But on the other hand, the maze-like quality of those pictures give off a sense of disorientation. I feel like at the end of those tunnels and halls, there's just tiles and tiles without an end. But generally, people find those pictures to be pleasant and calming. Whenever I look at them, I just wish that I could be there and explore the never-ending paths of this pool complex. I'm sure at one point everybody wished as a kid to be the only one in the water park, just to have all the fun for themselves. John Register was a New Yorker artist who is renowned for his simplistic paintings of empty, abandoned sceneries, often featuring chairs and pleasant daylight. From today's perspective, those paintings have very clear liminal properties. But again, comfort is the main attraction of those paintings. The pleasant lighting and the empty chairs, the big windows with never-ending, stunning views. It's almost like an invitation for the viewer to enter the painting and take a seat to fill the emptiness. The works of those artists perfectly portray how I see most liminal spaces. I find them to be calm, peaceful, melancholic, but in a good way, and above all, comfortable. Not just because of the nostalgia and familiarity part of those pictures, but the uncanny atmosphere actively adds to the comfort. Have you ever felt down, like you don't belong anywhere? Of course you have. We all have days like that from time to time. One of those days when nothing went well. Maybe you've embarrassed yourself, maybe you failed at something important, maybe you just struggled to socialize. Even if you don't want to admit it, sometimes you just get frustrated with life. Days where you just want to disappear from reality. Whatever it is, it drags you down. It makes you feel empty and defeated. You drag yourself home, where you're safe, and where you can finally lie down in exhaustion. Maybe you start reminiscing about the past. how it all used to be better, and you ask yourself when it all started going downhill. Sometimes it appears that life used to be better when you were just a dumb, ignorant kid. When the only thing that worried you was that you weren't back from school in time to watch your favorite TV show. I had many of those days. And on one of those days, I dragged myself onto the couch and aimlessly scrolled through Reddit in order to distract my mind. I came across a video compilation of Liminal Spaces, accompanied by melancholic and calm music. I've seen tons of liminal spaces before this moment. It was a topic that I found to be very interesting. And yet, at that moment, it was like I discovered them for the very first time again. I've never looked at liminal spaces the way I did at that moment before. I felt comfortable looking at them. I felt safe. It's almost like the pictures resonated with me on an emotional level. It surprised me. Empty, artificial, dark, uncanny. They broke every rule of what it takes for a picture to be comfortable. And yet, at that moment, they comforted me way more than any comfortable picture ever could. Why did I suddenly find comfort in those usually creepy pictures? At that moment, where life got me down, where I didn't know what to do with myself, where I was lost, I could sort of relate to liminal spaces. Emptiness, sorrow, disorientation, loneliness, they reminded me of myself. I saw in them what was happening inside me. I felt understood by some random pictures on the internet. In a weird way, I could relate to them. The combination of those feelings and the nostalgia that those pictures provided made me feel at ease. With all the stress and all the crap that's going on, those seemingly insignificant moments are what keep you going. Because when things get tough and you've got no one to talk to, and sometimes you don't even want to talk with anyone, sometimes it forces us to see things from a different perspective. And sometimes we see in art a reflection of ourselves and what we're going through. After all, isn't that what art is supposed to do? Have you ever wondered why liminal spaces feel so empty? It's because you're supposed to fill the void, to escape reality, even if it's just for a brief moment, and explore a world where you and your feelings are completely free. Liminal spaces are the most comfortable when you're mentally at your lowest. And I know there are people watching this after having one of those bad days. People who have been through a lot lately. People who need a break from reality. People who desire to disappear. And even if your misery continues tomorrow, I want you to take a minute from your day and embrace the emptiness.